organizers of IGDC, as Investor Publisher Connect volunteer team, we want every startup to meet investors and publishers and hopefully get funded or hopefully get good publishing deals. But for that to happen, we want you all to take this session, have some notes. You can also meet or interact Darsh at IGDC if possible, if you are interested. We'll try and facilitate conversations between now and IGDC if possible. But the most important thing is come to IGDC with a kick-ass presentation, make a great impact on the investors and publishers, and hopefully you'll raise funding or you'll get all the goals that you're trying to achieve. So good luck for the IP Connect program. This year will be probably the biggest. So typically we have about 80 to 100 startups, but this year I think it will be more than 150 startups. So please make notes and make your pitch deck stand out of that crowd, right? So that's when you'll get funded essentially. So over to you, Darsh. Have a good time. You'll find very passionate founders in the conversation today.
That's the category of founders I'm always looking out for. So
Perfect,
thank
Darsh.
you so much, Ravi Kiran, for the amazing layout for the entire conversation, right? The brief was very apt. So hi everyone. So Charitya, also thank you so much for the kind words. So let me start by just laying some very basic groundwork and basic idea as to how the session would go. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. I have my chat window open. I'll try to address them during the presentation, also at the end when the Q&A session starts. Feel free to make notes of those questions for everyone on the chat so that when we can go back to them and then look after it. Let me start by just saying that thanks IGDC for giving me this opportunity, and onwards to the presentation. So I have tailored the presentation today to basically focus a little more on the gaming industry. We have to understand the audience, and that's something that is also very important for a pitch deck, for a good pitch deck. If the audience is not if we don't make the audience understand exactly what our business is, well, I don't think the investors would be interested, right? So let's start with the basics. I will start by saying a couple of things about what we've seen people do wrong in the past, and then we move on to the slides, the presentations that we've created. So let's say, for example, we start with a lot of founders are very passionate about their concept. They're very passionate about what they are doing. They're very passionate about how they are building the whole business around their concept. However, what they fail to understand is they always talk about the concept. They don't talk about how it can be converted into a revenue generating model, into a business. So that's going to be the crux of it, of the entire session today, right? So I hope I've laid the groundwork well. And I hope that these basic knowledge that I'm going to pass on today will help you crack a lot of IP publisher and investor connects that you're going to have, especially in IGDC and also beyond that, right? So I'll start by simply introducing myself in brief again, and we'll take it from there. So to start with, well, my name is Darsh Doshi. I'm a chartered accountant. I have 15 plus years of experience in fundraising. Since last 10 years, I've been advising a lot of startups, and I've done debt equity. I've been on both sides of the table. I've been the lender as well as the borrower. And overall, that's kind of my experience. I've done more than 2,000-3,000 decks by now, and we've seen a lot of companies, a lot of gaming companies also coming up, and both sides of the story, be successful as well as companies that are no longer in the organization, active anymore. Having said that, the journey is very fascinating for everyone. So that's basically kind of about myself. Last year, we closed roughly around 22 deals on equity side, and on the debt side, we would have done roughly around 100-120 crores. That's a small brief about the pedigree that we bring to the table, right? So let's start with what is a deck, right? Not everyone will be aware of what is a deck. A lot of you are science background developers, may not understand what deck is and why it is important. So I'll put it in very simple words. Deck is basically what communicates what your concept is to the investor. It is a mode for you to communicate what your concept is to the investor, because you're not going to always get a room you're not always going to get a meeting with the investor. So how do you communicate what your concept is? That is what the deck is, right? A deck is a place for all facts. These are not places for speculation. These are not places for assumption. Deck is all about facts. Deck is all about what you plan to do going forward. Deck is what about your concept is and what your past performance has been like. Especially in gaming industry, it's very important, and this will be covered very well going forward. But just to again make you understand why deck is important, without a deck, investor is not going to get interest in your concept. That's the first thing that they know about what your business is. So let's then talk about why is it important, right? Are we aware of what are the things that are necessary when you go to an investor or a publisher? As a group, are we aware that it's not just about the deck, it's also about the financial model? Are we aware that we don't just need to go to them with a concept, but we also need to go to them with a business? So that is exactly why deck is a part of the entire thing when we go to investors. But then why is deck so important, right? Let's start basics. Gaming industry is super competitive. How do you identify that you are different from other gamers? How do you identify you're different from other developers, right? What are you doing unique? How do you stand out in the market? What is going to be so unique about you that you're going to succeed in the market where few others have failed? These are the kind of questions that investors would have, and your deck should be addressing these kind of questions. They should be giving answer to these kind of questions, right? So let's talk about what are the roles of different collaterals which are mandatory for fundraise. One is a pitch deck, one is a financial model, right? So financial model talks about how you're going to convert your users to revenue, how you're going to make money, where you're going to spend, etc., etc. But that is a conversation that's happened, let's say, third, fourth, fifth meeting with the investor. But how do you get your first meeting? How do you get the foot in the door? That is through the investor deck. And that's why pitch deck is extremely important. It reflects what you are trying to present in front of the investor. And mind you, I'll repeat again, a lot of founders are so attached to their concept, they do not know how to move out, how to zoom out, and focus on whether there is business to be made rather than just the concept. So this is something very important when you're building a pitch deck, right? So I hope we are clear in terms of why a pitch deck is important. If I have to quickly summarize it in one statement, it is pitch deck is the foot in the door. Without this, you're not going to get your investors in your room, right? If I have to now move on to how do you build a decent good pitch deck. So I have structured today's conversation in 3 different segments. Segment 1 is going to be about talking about the flow, talking about the structure, talking about a framework of how a pitch deck should be like. Once we are done with the framework, I will also be talking about, in the second segment, how certain specific slides to be made. So while in the generic framework, we'll talk about what to do, what not to do, then we'll boil down specifically into certain slides, into certain segments, and talk about how people make mistakes here and how we can correct those mistakes. I will also give you examples of what a good slide looks like. I will give you examples of why content is more important than the design. And I'll give you certain other examples, may not be of the gaming industry, of other industries, but will give you a very good parallel into how you should be making it. And then the third would be a summary where we'll talk about exactly what we learned and a Q&A, right? So let's start off with the first part of today's conversation, the framework. And the framework starts with the structure. So how do you structure a pitch deck? So imagine this presentation that I'm presenting right now. Everyone should be able to identify what my heading is, where my content is, and where do I have things which are for design purpose only. Doesn't matter if it's this slide, doesn't matter if it's this slide. You know where your eye is drawn to first, right? So this is a structure of a deck. This is literally, if I'm an architect, this is the layout of my presentation. So let's talk about that. So how should a deck look like? How should the structure be? It's very simple. You have to define the white space in a presentation. So what do I mean by white space? So in my presentation, you will realize this is the portion. This is the portion where you will see all my headings coming up. This is the white space for where all my headings are going to be. So does that mean you can't move it around? Yes, you can, but don't make it very difficult for people to follow. Right? That's the first thing. Let's talk about the second thing. My content is generally going to be in this area, which is just below my heading, just below what my overview is. I will also define very few places where I can put jazzed up stuff. So it could be below over here where I have this colorful band. It could be here where I have a link or a tab for a link. It could be any place like this. And as game developers, I'm sure this is something you guys are aware of. You know, you always keep thinking of how should be the flow. You might have heard about something called as a Z layout. What is a Z layout is you start from top left, move right, come down, bottom left, and move right. That's a Z layout. So let's have a look at how a good structure looks like. So you have to define a white space. Once you've defined your white space, you have to define the content space, which I just spoke about. Next, it's very important that all the data that you put in is absolutely crisp and absolutely precise. If you do not have source for a data that you're giving in, don't put it here. All the data that you put in has to have some basis for it to be justified. If I ask you a question, why so? If I ask you a question, where did you find this? If I ask you back working for the data, you have to be able to provide it to me. And last is navigation friendly. So what do I mean by navigation friendly? If I directly move from, let's say, the deck that we were on, let's talk about, if I directly move from why is pitch deck important to directly a team slide without giving you how a structure should look like, will it make any sense to you? If I move directly from, let's say, revenue, how to make revenues to directly, let's say, how the market size of the company is or market size of the industry is, it will make no sense for you, right? So it is very important that we make presentations which are navigation friendly. And second, what I also mean by navigation friendly is if I should be able to pull out data easily from the slide. I should not be trying to figure out where is the data on the slide. So now I would put it in this way, a very good example of how not to make a slide would be the slide in front of you right now. Because if I showed you this slide with no context at all, would you be able to make out what I meant by structure and what I meant by defining the white space, defining the content space, and so on? This is not very navigation friendly, right? So it's kind of counterintuitive here. You might say, okay, the slide I am presenting in front of you is not navigation friendly, but that was the whole point. I wanted to make you understand why this is not a great slide. I'll give you another example. I've given a link here. The moment I click this link, I'll be out of the presentation and I'll go to some other screen. Let me share my entire screen in front of you so that you can experience this. Let's say I'm in a presentation and I want to provide some link to you. When I click on this link, it takes me out of the presentation and it takes me somewhere else. While I'm going through this specific link and example, it is very much possible that I might have multiple different tabs open already. And the moment I close this tab, I have now moved on to something else. And my deck has lost now. But that's counterintuitive, right? That's not something that we want. So we will have to make sure that our slide is very navigation friendly, that our deck is very navigation friendly. It doesn't take you out at any moment, and these are very important. So that's basically about the structure. So if I have to summarize, define the structure of your entire deck design. Make sure you have defined white spaces for every different content you have. Make sure the content is easily navigable. Make sure the content is precise. Make sure that it is navigation friendly, and I am not supposed to move out of this deck at all. Let's move on to probably one of the most important part of this entire presentation. Okay, and that is the flow. Your attention span for us is not going to be more than 5 to 7 slides. And that's going to be true even for investors. No investor is going to look at your slides for 10 minutes, for 20 minutes, for 30 minutes, and have the same attention span. We have to make sure that our first 5 slides are the most important slides we have. If you miss these first 5 slides and you start putting in random things here, you're gonna completely miss on that investment. And this is not just true for investors, this is true for any form of presentation. So let's take an example. Let's say we have different mix of programmers here. We have different mix of developers here, right? Some of you would be very early. Some of you would be people who've done a lot in the industry. There'll be a good mix here. Let's say your team is the strongest point. Where would you start your deck? It would have to be from the team. You cannot start your deck not talking about your strongest points. So if you think your product is the hero your product in the first 5 slides. Talk about what the product is, talk about what the USPs are, talk about why it is so different. Let's say the product is not the hero. Let's say you are not very experienced or well achieved in the industry. What do you do then? Then there was a concept that came up to you, right? There's a reason why you're doing this. There was a problem that you're trying to solve. And the problem could be as simple as the retention is not too great. The problem could be as simple as the UI is not great. Whatever the problem might be, then focus on the problem that you're solving. So there could be so many different flows that you can decide to keep in your presentation. What you need to remember is your first top 5 slides are the critical slides here. If you miss out on this, you are done with. So let's talk about a few examples. Here I'm talking about option 1. Option 1 is a slide where I'm talking about, I would start with the industry. These are for people who have probably not achieved much in terms of past history, right? And we are focusing more on only those people who have figured out what the problem is in the industry, and the problem is such large that we would be able to convince the investor to invest in the problem. So this is option 1, where we are focusing on the problem, we are focusing on how we are solving it, talking about what our product is, bringing out the difference in our product, comparing it with our peers in the industry, talking about how we are going to go to market, then talk about the team and the achievements of the team in the past. Let's talk another example. We would do this flow, let's say, for example, for a team who has more than 30 years of experience per person, or let's say more than 10 years, 15 years of experience per person, who have some achievements to boast about in the industry, and then talk about what product these people have decided to put their focus on. So the idea is, I have got an excellent team, and the team has cumulatively decided to focus on this product. And then the flow continues the same way. The only difference here is my focus is not going to be on the solution. My focus is not going to be on the problem. My focus is not going to be on the product. It's going to be on the team. Let's talk a third possibility. I want the product to be the hero. I don't want to talk about the problem it's solving. Maybe it's not solving any problem. Maybe it's just a game which is amazing. I don't want to talk about the team because you're fresh out of college, or probably we are fresh out of just doing a couple of years of experience. That's it. So what do I focus on? I focus on the product. I focus on what I have built or what I'm planning to build. And this is very important. If you are not able to catch the investor's attention in the first 5 to 7 slides, I do not think the investment would happen. And this is from experience. Let's now talk about. That's a very good point. In the chat, Bhavya Prashant has very aptly identified that there's no problem per se in the industry that we are at, right? It's about entertainment. So let's say, for example, you're not creating a social issue game, right? So Bhavya, I would want to, in such case, focus probably on what the product is. And if there is an amazing, let's say there is an amazing team behind you, then I would focus on going this route. Let's start with the team. But you have to identify what is right for you. You have to make sure what will have the largest impact and make that first. So let's move on to, I hope summary is okay. I hope we all are clear on how the flow should look like and what a structure should be. Because this would conclude this first part, which was very small, probably let's say a 5 to 7 minutes part, where we were discussing about how a structure of a presentation should be. And we talk about how the flow of our presentation should be, right? Now, before I move ahead, I would like to give you a few examples of how I would have made a flow. Okay. So let's come back to this link. And this is a live example which we have done for someone in the past. Let me change my screen to that example and show you how we've done it for them. Obviously, I have redacted the data. You will see lorem ipsum everywhere over here. But that's kind of very important for me. I cannot share everyone's data. However, you will understand what I mean by structure and flow here. So this is page 2. This talked about who these people are, the promoters, what their background was, and what is the mantra that they live by, which was eat, play, sleep, repeat. Okay. The whole idea that they had was they wanted to build a complete platform which was focused on a certain ultra casual concept of gaming, basically word games. And we'll come to that. But they wanted us to focus on them. They wanted us to focus on these people because they had achieved a lot in the industry, which you will come to know about over here. So we showcased their portfolio games, some marquee games that they had already built, some for themselves, some for others, some white labeled. And then we came to what the game we were talking of. So the flow we took here was about the organization and the promoters. And then we moved on to what their achievements or what their successful items till now were on the Play Store. And then we moved on to talking about what the product is. And then the normal flow, how the experience of the product was, what were the unique features, what variants were available, what were the in-app options available for purchase, and so on. Then we talked about what their focus is going to be in terms of market area. Then we talked about who their competitors were and how they were different. Then we talked about how they're going to market their product. And I'm going to focus specifically on marketing as one part of the slides that we focus on. This was the team below the heads. This was a team that they had gathered and they wanted us to explain which team is going to do what. Here are the key milestones that they've done till now. What was the peak downloads? What is the average rating on Play Store? How much revenue have they made and so on. This was a life cycle of a game, how we expect the game to take off and so on, increase the value and so on. So let's move back to the earlier presentation and then we'll come to this presentation as and when we feel it is necessary and I can give you examples. Let's now focus on one very important part, which is content. What do I mean by content? and I've repeated this earlier also, data is the king, especially when you talk about gaming industry, because I mean, everyone works on data. Everything is recorded in games. You have your logs, you have your number of users, you have your daily average users, you have your monthly average users, sorry, active users, and so on and so forth. So we need to make sure that the content that we give out is accurate, is precise, and is helping us in converting and probably convincing the investor that what we are presenting in front of you is amazing. So there's a very basic framework, and I'm sure a lot of you developers are already aware about this. However, let me reiterate this because this is very important. And that framework is called REM framework: retention, engagement, and monetization. This is what an investor is looking at. If I have to summarize any product being a success or a failure, it depends on just three metrics: retention, engagement, and monetization. Now, these three metrics will have their own drivers, and we can discuss these drivers in detail. We can talk about what is important, what is not important. We can talk about what is important for a casual gamer versus what is a game versus what is important for a mid-core game. We can discuss all of that out. However, the framework remains the same: retention, engagement, and monetization. So let's get an example, right? I got your question, Bhavya Prashant, again. I will come back to this once I'm done with this segment. So let's talk about retention. So in retention, it's very important that we talk about not just the number of sessions, right? We also talk about how many people, what is the length of the session, right? We talk about how many people on day who've downloaded have continued playing with us for D1, or let's say a D7 bucket, or let's say a D365 bucket. And this week on week bucket tracking is very important. When we talk about engagement, we have to talk about, as I was saying, number of sessions, the average session value, time that a person is engaging themselves with, right? And these kind of data is very important. Now your question might be, hey Darsh, while you're telling me this is amazing, that I have to talk about REM, forget monetization, forget engagement, forget retention, I'm still in development stage. What do I do in content then, right? That's a very fair question you might have. I'm still developing my app. I don't even have my alpha testing, which has now come up with Play Store. Forget beta testing. What do I do now, right? What do we do in such a stage? So in that case, we can talk about certain numbers, which I'm going to come to now in my next slides. But the framework still remains the same. We will keep talking about retention, we'll keep talking about engagement, and we'll keep talking about monetization. This is what differentiates a developer with passion versus a developer with passion and business acumen. Okay. Now, these are some examples. I am not saying they are beautifully made. Let me be very clear. I am not saying that these slides are very good to look at, but it gives you a good example of what a good content would look like. The design, the structure may not be great, but it tells you what a good content is. It is talking about what their CAC is, right? It is talking about how they moved in terms of conversion. It is talking about what is the LTV versus their CAC. It is talking about how many number of people are playing, what is the average revenue they are making out of it, what is the increase in numbers, how the active users have moved. And this is key. However, as I had pointed out earlier, what happens if you are at different stages? What happens if I'm still developing my game. I have not yet gone out in the market. I will come to that now. So let's look at what would be an ideal scenario. Let's say you are a company which is still developing your games. Don't talk about expected traction for the game. It's all humbug. It's all something that we have in our mind, something that we want to achieve. But rather talk about what the USPs are. Talk about the product. Talk about the development timelines. Talk about how you're going to launch your game. What is the sprint in which you're going to work about what feature. Talk things that are tangible. Talk things that is easier for people to grasp without questioning whether what you've said is right or wrong. I'll give you another example. Let's say your app is running. Let's say you've already launched. Let's say you have wonderful user ratios, you have wonderful user numbers, but you do not know, you've still not started earning money out of it. You don't have in-app purchases, you don't have ads, you don't have a price point, it's free to download. Don't again start talking about the traction or the revenues for the game. Talk about how large the industry is and how you are going to tap into that industry. Talk about sessions, right? Talk about engagements at that point of time, because that is what will get hurt the moment you start monetizing, right? I hope I'm clear till now. Any of you would want me to repeat on any of these things, just put it out on the chat. And I'll summarize this again for in the REM framework, in the retention, engagement, and monetization framework, what do you talk about if you're under development? Well, you talk about your development timelines, you talk about your USPs. That should be the focus. I'm not saying do not talk about what the traction would look like. You have to talk about it, but that should not be the core of your discussion. That should not be the core of your content. If you're into pre-revenue but already launched, good. Talk about the session times, talk about engagements, talk about how large the industry is and how you are going to tap into it. Think from the REM framework and then present your case. If you're already in early traction, very good. Do not talk about the projected revenues. Talk about your target drivers. Drivers are what? Drivers are average value per order. It's the ARPU, average per playing user. You can talk about your retention in terms of DAU MAU, in terms of D1, D7, D30, D365. Just don't simply talk about projected revenues. Well, you should talk about it, but it's not the core of it. And obviously, if you're at a growth stage, the focus has to be how your growth is going to be, right? Again, talk about drivers. Something that I've highlighted on top and made the heading over here is talk about stats rather than claims. If I have to give you two thumb rule in a gaming industry pitch deck, it has to be talk stats and not claims, and talk about the REM framework. Great. So Himanshu, I'll come to the dev stage pitch deck. So if it's a dev stage pitch deck, let me come back to the flow which I would have taken, right? I would have taken option number 3 here. And I think, Prashant, that would also be your, Bhavya Prashant, that would also be your question. We'll come to that. If I'm a development stage company, and let's say I talk about my team being very good, amazing, I have all the pieces to the puzzle, then I would take option number 2 and I would start with this, that my team is amazing. These are the achievements we've done in the industry. And then come to what product now we are focusing ourselves on. Collective team is something you can look at over here. You don't need to talk about just individuals, but team as a whole, team as a collection. Also, something that is very important here is you can identify who's doing what in your team and present it in front of the investor so that they are aware of whom to address what question to. So that could also be a very good flow for us to adopt. I would be happy to have the conversation of what is tailor-made for your specific company. Probably it will have to happen offline or probably during the Q&A, but this would be generally the route that I take. But let's say we do not have much to show for today, then I would have adopted option 3. My focus would be on what the product is, how the product is different, or what the USPs are. Then probably talk about industry directly and not even achievements. Probably directly go to the industry, talk about how large the addressable market is, how large the entire universe of the gamers are, and of that, what segment will we be achieving and how we are going to go to reach them. And then probably talk about the achievements that we've done, the team that we have set out, etc. All of this content is important, but the first 5 would be these, right? Now, how do we make sure that we address the REM framework while we are talking of the deck? That, like I was saying, depending on your stage, I am not saying you should not put what the not recommended cycle is. What I'm saying is it is recommended to focus on what the recommended tab is talking about. Okay. Sources are extremely critical. I've already covered this earlier while we were saying. So make sure you identify what the sources are, and they have to be credible sources. Do not just take a small snippet of a video of some developer saying someday and then put the link for that video. Well, that won't work. It has to be credible sources. Monetization. This is something that a lot of developers have a lot of issues with, especially when we talk about a tech. So let's talk monetization. There are so many different ways in which you can monetize. It could be ad revenues. Again, in ad, it could be different types of ad revenues. It could be static ads, banner ads, video ads, etc., pop-ups, so on and so forth. Let's call it ad revenues. Okay. You have in-app purchases. In in-app purchases, again, you have various different segments, right? You have skill purchase, you have personalization purchase, you have character-driven purchases, etc., etc. You can have a cost to download itself. What a lot of premium gamers do. I mean, premium is no longer an active model. It's all freemium now. But let's say that is another option available. Third could be sponsorship. You could actually run a sponsorship. Let's say, for example, Domino's decides that for this 1.5 month, the entire game or the entire platform will be themed like Domino's, or probably there are some extra tokens inside Domino's that you get, right? You call it sponsorship, you call it ads. Again, it's not exactly ad engine ad revenue, the first one that we discussed, but this would be another revenue stream that you have. There could also be tie-ups that you do, partnerships that you do with brands which are in real life, which are not exactly an outright partnership in terms of ads, which I was just talking about, right? In terms of sponsorship, which I was talking about. So for example, you may tie up with a brand like Pizza Hut, and if you achieve certain levels, you get tokens and coupons of Pizza Hut, which you only get money for once it is redeemed. So it's a mix between a sponsorship and, let's say, what do you call them? I forgot the name for it. But let's say it's a mix between what a sponsorship would bring to you versus what, let's say, an influencer marketing or a affiliate marketing would get to you. So there are various other revenue streams also, right? You can probably bring in a lot of users to some other app through your application. You can have an app-in-app monetization strategy. You could become an app-in-app for some others, right? So there are so many different ways in which you can make money out of it. In your deck, what are you going to focus on? Would premium or buy to play be considered outdated? So Karthik, I'll come to this question. While it's a very good part, I'll come to this question. So again, coming to what I was saying, which of these revenue streams would you consider to be a part of your deck? Because I am sure all of you can build all of this as a part of your deck. We have to identify what is possible for us today and put everything else into opportunities. Let's not make that mistake of saying, I'm going to do everything. You have to focus on making one of those things or two of those things successful. Once you are successful at that, you can move on to focusing on other ways of building revenue. So also what is important is you have to give a very good monetization strategy. When would you start your monetization? How would you start your monetization? What is the dip in terms of usage that you're expecting once you flip that switch? What would happen to that? I'll give you a very good example. Book My Show. I know it's not a game. I understand it's not a game, but still the concept remains the same. Book My Show decided to start service fee, and they suddenly saw a very big dip in their usage. Over a period of time, it started growing back, and till date, till date, they are the #1 ticket booking app, whether it's for movies, whether it's for plays, whether it's for a lot of events. We still resort to Book My Show. And nobody is now bothered about the convenience fee that they charge us. Same is true with Swiggy, Zomato, Uber, etc. Everyone. And same is also true for a lot of games in the past. A lot of games moved from free to play to freemium as a model. And this is where I'd like to address, Karthik, your question. Premium or buy to play as a strategy will depend on which market you are addressing to. So the moment you become premium or buy to play, there is a huge plethora of Indian market that will no longer be available to you, and it will be reduced from your obtainable market. So you will have to make the investor understand why this strategy and why it was important for you to adopt this strategy. Right? In your deck, you will have to justify why you decided to go against the flow and decide to do this. And that's absolutely fine. There might be a logical reason why you decide to do this. Right? However, what most people have gone to is free to play. But then if you want to move ahead, you want to improve your status in the game, you will have to definitely spend on the game. Let's take, for example, FIFA. Let's take, for example, Call of Duty. Let's take, for example, so many, I know We Are Humans. There are so many different games such that I can give you an example of where it was a freemium or a in-app purchase model, which has done successfully well. One more monetization strategy that a lot of developers, a lot of game developers forget about, and I'd like to highlight here, is merchandising. Do not discount the importance of merchandising. This is something that people don't realize. I'm not saying it should be at the start of the life cycle of the game. It could be at the mid level, it could be at the end level. It could be a threshold driven decision that once you cross, let's say, a certain number of users, certain number of average active users, then you decide to go there. But that's a very good strategy to adopt, especially if you're building a great community for yourself. So community building is another very important thing that you do. And that is a part of the REM framework. It helps you increase your engagement. And through that, you can decide how to do the monetization. Okay. So I hope I was clear on monetization. I have taken a little more time to explain what monetization is because I have seen a lot of promoters in the past make this error where we want to do everything. They're absolutely right. I think you've aptly put it. And I think it's let's move on to the next segment, and we'll come back to these questions again during the Q&A. These are some examples of revenue life cycle. In the first example, for an ultra casual game, right? So for an ultra casual game, if you'll see here, the life cycle generally starts fast and then starts fading down, as compared to a mid-core game, which would probably start slow and then keep building. Your peak would be generally at the fag end for a mid-core game as compared to an ultra casual, which will within a period of 1 year, probably even a few months, probably fade off, right? So we can take it that way. Okay. Now let's talk about the next example, which is go-to-market. Now this is something again which I have seen in the past. Let's take a very simple example. If I ask you what's going to be your go-to-market, these are the 4 answers I'm going to get. Most of you guys are going to give me. Okay. This is fair. This is fine. Okay. But this is not how we should be doing it. What we should be doing here when we talk about go-to-market is we need to make sure that we identify what we are going to do within that category. So don't just tell me what the medium of your marketing is going to be. Talk strategies about how you're going to market yourself. And strategies could also involve talking about what the cost would be, what the CAC would be, how much money you're going to spend, for how long you're going to spend, which agencies you're going to hire, which keywords you're going to focus on, which target market are you going to address, what's the demographics you want to reach out to. Talk about this with me. Talk about this with the investor. Tell them I'm ready. Tell them if I get your money tomorrow, I know where to spend it. No investor is going to give you money to keep it in your account for 5 months. That's not why investors are investing in you. They want you to use that money for growth. So make sure you tell them that you're ready, right? So there's a lot of homework that has to go before a deck is done at the promoter level. Because any agency is just going to help you create a deck based on what your inputs are, right? They will not be able to do your hard work for you. So it's very important that in the deck that is presented well, that you've done your research, you know what you're going to do. Because the worst thing that can happen is the money is in FD and it is earning 6%. That's not what investors are given you money for, right? I'll quickly run you through a few other points here. I'm nearing the end, so Manik, I'll take this question once I'm done with now and during the Q&A segment. Let's talk about team. How do you present your team slide? So this is where go wacky. It's absolutely fine. Do how you want to do it. It's up to you. Use your jargons. Use gaming as the background that you're working with, right? Talk about your achievements. Talk about your experiences. If I'm in game, I'm sure most of you will be giving it as HP and XP, right? So, put in things like that. It's okay. If you see, I've given you 2 examples of a different kind of team slide that we've built for people. Obviously, I've taken out a lot of data here, but you would still be able to see this, right? So this is something, be very clear, be wacky as much as you want to be. Start naming each other. So for example, I've given you examples here. You can call someone the boss and call someone the snipe. It's okay. It's absolutely fine. Last segment that I want to focus on, this is the last part of the second segment, which is focusing on certain defined slides. So we talked about marketing, we talked about team, we talked about the content in terms of REM framework. Now let's talk about numbers. And this is something which, again, as developers, you may not have a very big hold on, right? So I'll just very simply make it 3 pointers. Okay. Give a 4 to 5 year projection. Give summary numbers. Don't go down deep into how the numbers are going to move. And talk about what your ask is and where you're going to use the money. That's it. If you follow these 3 thumb rules, your number slides are going to rock. So I'll give you a few examples here. Look at these examples. The first one is for a healthcare company, which talks about how their company has done over the period of last few years, talks about what their retention ratios are, talks about how their cost has increased year on year, talks about what their projections are going to be, and talks about what their ask is, where they're going to use it. Right? So keep it as simple as possible. Last slide is competition. Guys, nobody is competition free. Do not use words which cannot be quantified. Do not say you are better. Do not say you are faster unless it can be quantified. If you can quantify, bring out that quantity. So for example, don't say that your graphics are more realistic. Say that your graphics are more realistic, which is going to increase the session time by 3 minutes. Give a tangible result out of it. Okay. I hope this makes sense. Like another example of this would be if I start selling bundled products versus individual products, I would sell 10% higher in terms of my average value or a 7% higher by my average value, right? These are the kind of tangible results you have to say when you talk about how you're better than the competition. And I'll give you 3 examples of how you can put your competition slide. Okay. Sorry, 4 examples. One is you can simply list out your competitors and tell what is covered better in you as compared to others. Next, you can just bundle all your competition in one place and then talk about how you are different from your competitors. And third and last is where you can simply identify on the coordinate axis two features that you want. One going, so for example, over here, if you'll see B2C, B2B, and media versus trade, and place yourself where you are as compared to your competition. I would recommend having the first option, which is competitive landscape, and the second, which is placing yourself in the quadrant. Both of them. However, if you're not too different, and these are features which you don't want to identify, pointing out who's having it and who's not having it, then you have the other option. Okay. Last thing before I conclude, I would like to say, be 100% ready before you reach out to the investors. You would have identified it's not just about creating a presentation. This is more of whether you are ready to do your business from the money that is going to come to you. Whether you are ready to do the business once the publisher decides to publish you. Are you capable enough of handling that pressure is what you're trying to communicate here, right? Do you have your research done? Do you have your next step ready? Do you have your next 10 months to a year ready in your mind as to what you're going to do? And that is very important. Whether it's publisher or whether it's investor, the readiness of you to take it head on is what is important. So unless you have answers to these questions which I pose today, which an investor is expected to pose tomorrow, which a publisher is expected to pose to you tomorrow, do not start circulating your deck. Also, I would like to highlight there are two types of deck. There is a teaser deck, which is generally a 5 to 8 pager, a very summary deck where you don't put in everything in detail, just in summary. It's okay to merge two slides over there together. You can put your team's achievement together at one slide. You can talk about the product and its USP in one single slide. You can talk about the industry size and your marketing strategy to reach to that same industry that you were talking about in a same slide and make a summary deck, which is, let's say, a 5 to 7 pager, 5 to 8 pager. But you should not start circulating it till the time you have your detailed deck ready, which would generally go anywhere in the range of 18 to 25 slides, right? Also, it is important to be ready with your financial model. Also, to be ready with what you are going to do next once there is a go ahead from the person you are reaching out to, whether it's a publisher, whether it's an investor, right? One very important point which I've mentioned at the end over here is a no-go limit. What do I mean by no-go limit? When you go to an investor, and this is specifically to an investor, I'm not sure how much it is applicable to a publisher, but when you go out to an investor, it's very important that you know what is the deal that you're ready to not go ahead with. Okay. So if there is a deal, there is a threshold beyond which you're not going to accept the deal. Keep that in mind before you start circulating. Because once you start circulating, you're going to see many people discounting your complete concept versus a lot of them being impressed by it. So you'll see all different colors of valuation that your company can get. So be ready for that. Okay. If the last 1 minute I'm going to take is to summarize what we've discussed today, focus on the strength, hero what your strengths are, don't get caught in the story, also focus on what the business is. Make sure you're talking of stats and not about claims. Numbers cannot lie, right? So you have to talk about stats and not claims. As much as possible, summarize each slide so that even if they don't have the time to go through everything, they can just read the summary and understand what the context is. Be precise. Don't use words like vague unless you can quantify. Don't use vague words like better, easier, faster, etc., etc. Unless you can quantify that in numbers. And as I said last, which I touched upon, be ready before you go out. Do not go out before you're ready with the answers to the question. This was it, guys. This was a small presentation about how to make a good deck. I hope this was helpful and I hope it wasn't too long or too boring. Your questions, happy to have here. So Charita, how would you like to do? Would you also want people to ask questions and allow them to speak? How would we work about that? If you can just shed some light there.
Oh, yeah, they can actually ask the questions or they can even put it in the chat box.
Sure. So I'll start taking some of the questions in the chat box that I have and probably take it from there. So one question, Karthik, I hope we are okay with your question on premium versus play to buy. Sorry, premium and pay to buy question. I hope that was answered well. And if you have more questions on that, you can repeat that on the chat. Manik, I see your question. Should the pitch deck be kept brief, 5 to 10 slides, and have a second version? The answer is yes. I think I addressed that at the end. So 5 to 10 slide is a great teaser, and then you should have a very detailed one which talks about all the content that I presented here. Right. So this is a great question. Moving on to the next question, Surjan. What if we are pitching to a single player game to a publisher rather than an investor? Well, take out the number and the ask. Everything else remains the same. You still need to communicate your question, your concept to the publisher. Also, I think a couple of other points very important when you're going to a publisher. A publisher is going to be someone who's better equipped to understand technicality. So you might have to add slides which talk about how your framework works, what architecture you're using, how capable that architecture is, and so on and so forth. So you will have to add those slides. I think apart from that, everything from how large the market is, how you're going to address it, how your marketing is going to run, all of this is important because that shows your skin in the game and why publishers should also bank on you. So Sujan, I think apart from that, I don't think there is going to be much of a difference between the deck between an investor versus a publisher. So I hope that was that was the answer that you were looking out for. Manik Sachdev, should the ask in the summary, the question goes like, should the ask in the summary reflect the amount of funding we intend to raise, or is it better to list how the budget will be used, mention the stats, and keep it for the second round via detailed deck? So Manik, that's a very interesting question and a good, I would say, point that you raised here. I would simply like to say that we will have to identify what our runway for the next 12 to 24 months are, depending on what our ask is. Based on that, we should mention what the ask is in the deck because there are mandates to which an investor is investing. So it is not necessary that an investor who wants, let's say, wants to invest a $5 million versus an investor who wants to invest, let's say, a $2 million will look at your deck with that perspective. So it's very important to mention what the ask is. Equally important to define where it is budgeted towards. So we should do that for sure. If the idea is to identify what the second round fund amount would be, it's okay to do that today, but I would stick to keeping our deck to this current round that we are raising. I hope, Manik, that answers your question.
Yes, Darsh.
Jayant Shukla, your question is for under development stage. Do we put up a forecast slide or ask amount to the investor or both? And in case of ask amount from the investor, how do we structure it? Very good point, Manik. I'll directly present this slide to you. If you look at this fourth, let me just annotate that segment. Just a second. Okay. So this is the example I would do if you are under the development stage. If you're in a development stage, this is what you should be looking at. Talk about summary financials. In a gaming platform, you might not have revenue, EBITDA, PAT. You might talk about retention, etc. And that's how we can take it. Okay. Himanshu, I hope this was okay in terms of your question, Jayant. I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, just to add on to that, like what I specifically meant was how to structure the ask slide is Like you definitely want to explain the ask amount from the investor for that particular current stage of investment, right? But apart from this, what all details we need to add to the slide, right? Because there is limited space in that one slide wherein I cannot, like give all the details about how that fund would be utilized in various components, whether it is about team building, making the product and taking to the
Right.
market and initial investment in getting the users as well.
Got it, Jen. So very, very fair question. So Jen, you should summarize it by giving a very summary projections, like let's say half a slide, and the rest of the slide talk about the amount you need and where you're going to use it. So for example, when I say where you're going to use it, let's say marketing, right? Do not identify in that slide what kind of marketing you're going to do. Just say marketing. You can break your marketing into performance marketing and brand building if you have two separate segments over there, right? You can do that. Let's talk about another segment, let's say tech development, right? So tech development would have two parts. One would be third-party tech that you're going to take over, and the second would be the team that you're building in-house. So identify these kind of segments in that presentation. Just make a simple pie chart. Like if you see this example for uh, where you have Dr. 911, the second slide, if you see over there, there are two types of tech development that is identified, Jayant. So as much as possible in summary, just give them the breakup and that should be enough.
Got it. Thanks.
Right. Next question from Himanshu. What do you do if you only have a website, not a company or a registered startup? How do you provide confidence to investors? Okay, great. Himanshu, I'm assuming here there's an undertone of we working somewhere else also. If that's not the case, please let me know, right? But having said that, if there is no company in place and it's a concept that you're starting with, investors will only be able to invest once the company is up. So at least get it started. If nothing else, get the incorporation started, right? And a shameless there would be our company does it. So having said that, feel free to tell the investors that you're committed to it. Show them how that commitment would turn around, right? In terms of, let's say, for example, uh, uh, you know, who all are going to join you once you go full time, right? So that is another way of communicating how you are into this 100%. So Himanshu, that I hope would be sufficient. I mean, get your company started. You can use your parents, your family members, anyone to be the directors there, but you should get it started if you're all in. Again, Bhavya Prashant, a lot of contribution. Thank you so much. Your next question is a little long, so let me read it out fast. For example, we have a product that we think is amazing, but then there is a dilemma whether the certain investors who know that game development is and know all the genres, potential top performing players, and then there is investors who don't even know an open world adventure called Call of Duty in the same way Avenger Endgame, highest grossing, etc. Okay, so if I have to summarize this question, what I understand is your question is it may not make sense to a lot of investors. Well, you're absolutely right, but investors who really want to invest in this category would have already done their research, would already know what it means. Most investors, unless they're ultra HNIs and don't have a formal structure of investing, in that case, you're absolutely right. They may not understand the nuances of gaming industry and game development. But having said that, I mean, most investors who are ready to invest in this industry would have done their research. So you need not worry too much about whether they understand I would say, the gross lines of it or probably the broad lines of it, but they'll be able to at least get that much. They may not be able to talk tech with you, they may not be able to do that with you, but otherwise it would be good. Next is Manik again, Darsh, if we are pitching ourselves as a studio with prospective pipeline in place and mention about the game under development, what would be the best way to present the monetization strategy? Okay, very, very, very good point, Manik. And let me take this take this question. Okay. You are still under development. You have to talk about strategies of monetization and give examples of another company that would have done that. Let me take the liberty of 1 minute to present one slide to you.
That's sorry,
Yeah.
a slight variation to what you said. We are pitching ourselves as a studio. We are open to looking at different monetization strategies based on the games titles that we start building. But the current one has a selected one. Like we're going for a premium model. We might go for a subscription one. Now, what's the best way to present it in terms of content so that there is no confusion there with the investor?
Very good, very good. And I've covered this in my slide here. So I had to kind of rush through that slide a little bit. That's why I probably did not identify it very well. The second point here. So it's very important to identify what you're going to do today. And the third point, give timelines to when you are going to start the other things. So Manik, if you're starting today, let's say monetizing through a premium model or through a pay-to-play model, make sure you are identifying that and the reasons for it right away and give a timelines by when you're going to explore other revenue streams.
Noted, got it.
Right?
Okay.
Does that answer your question, or is there something I still need to explain here?
It answers. I think I just have to think of how to structure the content, what to put first, what to put towards the end. Like,
Yes, yes. So I can give you an example over here. What you could simply do is probably give a roadmap kind of a slide which talks about, the next arrow talks about by when the next target will be achieved and by when the next is achieved. Right?
got it.
So that could be one way of doing it. And just below that, you could talk about the drivers that would achieve that for you. So for example, for a pay to play versus pay to download segment, you might talk about number of downloads versus the average. In a freemium model, you may talk about number of active users upon versus conversion of payments, right? So you can talk about those kind of numbers as a summary below that.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Himanshu, your question was how to ask for a grant for making a demo project than full funding. Just by asking it, Himanshu. Honestly, nothing else changes. You just need to ask for it. There are various grants which are available. You can go to Startup India program, which is a government website. They have a lot of content in terms of industry specific grants, which government has come out with a lot of others have come out with. If I come across other resources where I can get them, I'll probably circulate it through this portal. But yeah, that would be the best way of doing it. We will need to identify people who are giving grant in this industry and then start applying to them. There is a scheme called Seed Fund India scheme. You can try for that. There's a Seed Fund India scheme run by under Startup India program. So you get a 20 lakh grant and a 50 lakh loan. Grant is if your product is not yet ready, and loan is if your product is ready and go to market stage. And Bhavya Prashant, your next question is there a difference between pitching to investor versus pitching to publisher? I think I briefly covered this. In summary, when you're pitching to a publisher, I'm sure they are more interested in figuring out their revenue stream versus ours. So it is important that you highlight that, number one. Number two, whether your systems are capable enough of handling the pressure, because if the publisher is going to put in their word and put in their money and taking it out to people, it's very important that they know that you have a team and you have a tech capability that is capable enough of doing it. So you will have to make sure of that. And as I said earlier, I mean, they will understand technicals better than a normal VC or a normal investor. So that is also a very important point. Just to, when you go to a developer, they would focus on, how good, the coding of the game is, how good the metrics are, how good they are fitting into the other games of those publishers. How easy is it for an existing player on their platform to switch to your game or to try your game out, right? These kind of expertise would only come through a publisher or through a studio, right? So these are the things you could focus on when you're talking about that. Next is Jayant again. How do you get the balance right when trying to convey the USP? How to choose what all to put in the deck? Okay. Very good. Okay. That's a very valid point. Generally put the top 5 things and then give a link for others. How do you choose which are your top 5? Well, think from the driver's perspective. What is going to drive the highest traffic or highest revenue or highest retention or highest engagement? So weightage has to go that way. You can't be putting in a point which only interacts 1%. I mean, which has just 1% impact. I mean, then you shouldn't have it.
Yeah, basically, this question stems from the target audience which we are targeting, right? We are into casual space, which is a very, very broad space, but equally it is very competitive. So for me to convince the potential investor or anybody who's looking just at the deck, it becomes very difficult, like how much of details I can put into the slide so that somebody who's reading it methodically can grab the ideas, okay, that this is how we are trying to differentiate ourselves and probably might be better, like you mentioned, right? But
Correct.
it is very difficult to, put them just into like 2, 3 bullet points as such.
I get that, and this is again where getting caught in the story versus business side of things come from. So, Jayant, I would strongly recommend that give weightage to those USPs and select the top 5, top 7. Have the restraint of removing the others.
Yeah, got it, got it.
Yes, Bhavya, definitely would connect offline. Since you're already working with us, I'll just get the connects and I'll get the coordinates and get in touch. You'll have to allow me till Monday evening, but I'll get that done. So I think I've addressed all the questions here. If any further questions, anyone, please feel free to ask. Thank you so much. Thank you, Imanshu. Thank you, Bhavya. Thank you, Manik, for the questions. Thank you, Jayant. Thank you, Sujan. Thanks a lot. And again, thanks IGDC for giving this platform.
Thank you, Darsh. So I hope there are not any more questions right now from the participants. So if you have any further more questions, you can connect with Darsh on LinkedIn and we can share his details over to you guys. You can reach out to me for that as well. And thank you so much, Darsh, for the insightful session. And thank you, Vix.